1902, in Los Angeles, the first permanent theater was created. Today, over 80% of all films are available to watch in some official capacity.
Video games are the latest craze to sweep the country and most of the world, too. Millions of people are addicted to hours of gazing at electronic images on game screens in arcades and in their own homes.
In 1977, the Atari 2600 was released, ushering in the second generation of video games. A study by the Video Game History Foundation concluded that 87% of all video games since 2010 are not available in any official capacity. The video game industry is worth more than movies and music combined. Truthfully, the problem is much worse than an industry that refuses to preserve its own legacy. The vast majority of all video games being made right now are built with a kill switch, no different than a book or a movie built with a self-destruct mechanism.
Although I reach out with one hand for the new in technology, I never let go of the old, and I believe that both have their place, and in fact maybe the real question is how to have one foot in the past and one foot in the future and somehow bring that together, and that's the present.
Fundamentally, video game preservation is a consumer rights issue at its core. As a consumer, there's two different types of purchases that you can make. A service license only requires that both parties have a general expectation of when service ends. This one's pretty straightforward. You could rent a car for a couple days or get a haircut. Yes, even subscription-based MMORPGs are under this model. What's your favorite one? Mine's Final Fantasy XI. On the other hand, a perpetual license grants indefinite usage. This is the agreement that the vast majority of all of your purchases are under, including the vast majority of video games. At least in theory, your games are under a perpetual license. In practice, however, it's some sort of feudalism license from the Dark Ages, where you can purchase and own an item, yes, but at any point the feudal lord can come down and take it from you. This sounds absurd, I'm sure, if you're someone who isn't very familiar with video games as a hobby. These are snippets from two end-user license agreements. One is from Blizzard Entertainment and the other is Ubisoft. My favorite quotes are highlighted in red. Blizzard reserves the right to terminate this agreement for any reason, or no reason at all. And everyone's favorite, you must immediately destroy all copies in your possession. Now, I'm not here to argue whether or not these end-user license agreements are legally binding. I'm just demonstrating the mentality of the publishers. At the very least, they believe they can take away your perpetual license. The vast majority of video games being made nowadays have critical information stored on a server somewhere. Publishers and developers refer to this as live service games, or gaming as a service. Once these servers go offline, you lose access to your game permanently. Legally and ethically speaking, this actually wouldn't be that big a deal if they sold most of these games under a subscription license. For one reason or another, developers prefer a one-time fee perpetual license. Publishers are slowly clawing away at consumer rights when they mislabel their transactions like this. In a nutshell, I pretty much just explained it as simply as I could. If you want the 1-hour version of what I just said, I would strongly urge you to check out the YouTuber Accursed Farms. There's currently a European petition going on right now. The petition aims to use legislation to force publishers to make end-of-life plans when they shut down servers, making those critical server assets that we talked about available in some way to the public. If you're a European citizen and you're interested, check it out. I'll leave it in the description. There's not much time left though. With a deadline of July 31st of 2025, all the other legal avenues have failed. This is the first one that has a real chance of being successful. I won't lie though, most of this is out of a desire to preserve games for future generations, and the legal arguments of consumer protections is the best way to get there. Unfortunately, preserving video games isn't necessarily in the best interests of developers and publishers. When video games were being published in the 80s and 90s, publishers at that time absolutely saw movies and music the same as games. You watched a movie or listened to a song and then moved on to the next one. There was never any fear at that time that video games would cannibalize each other. Every game could have its time in the spotlight. Today, it's not like that anymore. Publishers are deeply afraid of you putting down their game. The vast majority of publishers want you to play their game as much as possible. And if you come at it from the angle that they're losing profits, honestly, I can't really blame them. Sometimes developers will even shut down their own games out of fear that they're competing with themselves. The MMORPG Star Wars Galaxies was shut down, for example, right before the release of Star Wars: The Old Republic. Now, maybe I'm just taking crazy pills. I think both of these games could have been in existence at the same time, contrary to popular belief, but the main thing keeping these games from being online forever is actually not the cost of the servers that the games are hosted on. Fans of these games are more than happy to host servers of their very own. However, that would require the rights holders relinquish some amount of control to the customer, and that's an unacceptable arrangement for publishers. Relinquishing that control is the true cost to video game preservation.
The future value of that material is very much in the hands of those dedicated people who fight for preservation.
Outside of publishers or developers helping us directly, what do? What options do we have? Everything I'm about to mention is a very time-consuming process. There's simply more games being made than we have people who are able to put in the time to preserve them. When you're playing any game over the internet, your computer or video game console is sending packets to the server, and at the same time, the server is sending packets back to us, the user. And if you have enough people collecting packets, it's possible to reassemble the server. Unfortunately, all that data that you just collected will still be encrypted. If you're familiar with the Enigma machine during World War II, fundamentally it's the same type of scrambling of information. So if you're qualified to decrypt Enigma messages, you just barely have the necessary skills required to reassemble some of this code into some sort of readable format where you know what the game logic does. To give you an example of just how advantageous having the source code is, the original Diablo was ported to the Sony PlayStation 1. Naturally, they ported this version to other languages. When they were printing the Japanese version of the game, the developers accidentally left some debug files and a debug build on the disk. While it's not the source code itself, it had critical information for reassembling it. A coder by the name of Galaxy Hacks was able to reassemble the source code. It's now free and public for anyone to use. A YouTuber by the name of Modern Vintage Gamer was able to use that source code and port Diablo 1 over to the Nintendo Switch. It only took him about 3 days to do. It's completely free for anyone to download off of GitHub and mess around with. A game from 1996 is now on the Nintendo Switch, a platform it was never intended to be on. When people talk about gaming preservation, this is what they're talking about. Square Enix actually lost the source code for Final Fantasy VIII. Even though they're the original developers, reassembling the source code is no insignificant task. It certainly took longer than 4 days, that's for sure. Rumor has it Square Enix lost the source code for the upcoming Final Fantasy Tactics as well. Now, I was originally planning on ending the video here, but as it turns out, the Stop Killing Games initiative has actually been responded to. The organization Video Games Europe has posted a several-page document on why preserving games for future generations is actually a really bad idea. So I thought I would go over some of this documentation. Unlike a book or a film, an online video game is not a static work. Online video games evolve over time after their initial release date. This is highly valued by players and is required to compete in the market. Yeah, like I said earlier in the video, I always knew that the industry saw books and films as a totally different medium to video games. If films aren't a static piece of work, someone should have told that to George Lucas because he was re-releasing Star Wars over and over again. All video games, whether digital or physical copies, are licensed. What they acquire is a personal license to access and play the copy of the game they have purchased. The consumer does not acquire ownership of that video game. There is no legal uncertainty about the status quo of video games. Well, they just directly said we don't own our video games. The problem with that is they're selling games under a perpetual license. If publishers really want to remove video games from us at any point, they really should just sell us games under a subscription model with a designated end date. At the very least, it would quell some of the legal arguments that are coming their way. It is not clear what the initiators of Stop Killing Games seek to achieve. It appears to be a combination of a requirement to provide online services for as long as the consumer wants them. Okay, I have to stop here for a second. I don't know why they would bring that up. The Stop Killing Games FAQ clearly states that's not what they're asking for. Publishers are free to end support for video games whenever they choose to, according to the Stop Killing Games initiative. The number one counterpoint to stop killing video games seems to be you want video games to be supported forever. I don't know if this is an intentional misunderstanding or some sort of gaslight. Anyway, they go on to say, a requirement to provide a very specific form of end-of-life plan. They actually got that one right. That is demand, yeah. We do not believe these are proportionate demands. Of course they don't. They then go on to say, online video games are a complex operation. They offer interactive features that are supported by multiple servers. As consumer expectations for more engaging and involving content increases, these online features are increasingly becoming intertwined in the overall gameplay experience. This interconnected dependency makes it difficult to cleanly segregate online features from offline functionality. Here are the ways in which players and companies would be affected. Well, strap in, because this is quite a list, I have to say. Requiring games to run on private servers would result in the inability for game companies to continue to protect players. The absence of an effective moderation system would create a less safe environment for consumers. This not only presents a safety risk for consumers, but could also lead to brand reputation issues. Arguing safety issues is probably one of the weakest points that they have in this entire document. It's time for me to tell you a little story. There was once a game called Modern Warfare 3. People were unable to play the official Modern Warfare 3 servers without being hacked. Apparently, it was very insecure. So in order to not get hacked, people created a fan project called Plutonium. Plutonium is a private server where you can play Modern Warfare 3 without any security concerns. These private servers are more secure than even the official ones. Whether a server is private or official, it has no bearing on its security properties. And the other point that they made about brand reputation, dictating how your consumers use your product based off of brand reputation, is not a right that a merchant has ever had. It's a super weird thing for them to argue, but there it is. Allowing players to run private servers would present significant engineering challenges. Creating a private server compatible version would be a prohibitive cost. For the vast majority of video games, releasing the source code actually will be sufficient. Now, there's probably an example of a video game that has hyper-entrenched services and features, and assuming that video game can't be separated from certain features, which I doubt by the way, but for the sake of argument, the Stop Killing Games initiative is not retroactive, meaning today if there's a game that's super hyper-entrenched and the developers have no hope of restoring it to a usable state for the average person, they wouldn't be forced to go back and invest time and resources into restoring it. There's a lot of redundancy in what Video Games Europe says, and they repeat themselves often. They bring up reputational harm again, assigning it its own separate point. They start going over intellectual property rights, which on the surface is probably the best point that they have. Mandating games companies to keep their online games operational post-official support would undermine their rights. Forcing them to provide a product indefinitely would violate their rights. Endless support is not something that Stop Killing Games is even asking for. It says it directly under their frequently asked questions. Such a requirement could lead to community-supported versions of video games competing with official versions. This is actually true. Private servers do compete with the official ones. The requirement to provide things like source code only happens once service ends, meaning after they end support, that's when private servers become available. So who are they competing against exactly? They stop supporting the game. This document is filled with true statements if taken in a vacuum. However, the things that they bring up don't end up making a whole lot of sense in the grand scheme of what Stop Killing Games is asking for. One of the big contentious things that seems to come up in regards to private servers is when a game changes too much from when it was first released. Private server of World of Warcraft Nostalrius being a good example.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
Allowing consumers to create or run modified copies of online games would necessitate game companies to either license additional rights or refrain from enforcing them, effectively leading to a forfeiture of control over those rights. Technically, the law is written that way, but it is fundamentally just not true. For example, Twitch and live streaming games is a copyright infringement. Video game companies are fully within their right to stop live streams of games. The reason that they don't remove videos off of Twitch or YouTube is because it's free advertising. You don't get to pick and choose. You're either enforcing your copyright or you're losing it. If copyright holders actually were afraid of losing their rights, you can bet they'd purge everything off of Twitch and YouTube in a heartbeat. They go on to talk about all sorts of third-party licensing issues. However, it's sort of a non-issue because if the laws regarding consumer protections ended up changing, so would these third-party agreements. They close out by saying it is important to separate legal proposals being made by petitioners from the question of preservation of games as creative and cultural works. I sincerely hope that we can figure out a situation that preserves video games, and it's something that publishers can be happy with. They just need to give up a small amount of control back to the consumer. They say that members regularly donate game copies and hardware to preservation organizations. Preserving video games also includes donating things like source code. Relying on aging hardware is simply not enough. The YouTuber Digital Foundry did coverage on the new 50 series of graphics cards. Nvidia discontinued support for a unique function of their graphics cards, physics. You can use it for all kinds of different things. In the example above, it's being used for a basic smoke effect as the Joker is being taken into custody. The 50 series no longer has any ability to simulate physics, and the frame rate tanks.
On this little elevator into the area where you start seeing the actual like fluid, cool smoke effects that are added into the game from physics, and you see that the frame rate tanks down to like 17 FPS. Frame times are ridiculously broken. The situation is that an RTX 5000 user is getting a worse experience playing older games than an RTX 4000 user.
Nvidia's physics is not open source. Once all those graphics cards are gone, we can no longer play these old games from the early 2000s. In 100 years from now, can we preserve these games for future generations? This has been Retro Resurrections, signing off. And you take care of yourself, my friend.
Realizes that one day, due to the quite natural evolution of technology, which is to say the phone companies wiring up everybody with fiber optics, which is inevitable, that with that step comes much more than calling your grandmother on the phone. With that step comes really the first phase of a availability of all knowledge, all things, all art, all of the philosophical discussions, all of the films, all of the drawings, all of the recorded music, all of the performances, all going to exist in this vast vault of our common human culture, the real wealth of the human race.